Hey, how y'all doing? It's me, Crazyfrankie, and I'd like to welcome you to my Week 15 4 key game picks. Before we talk about week number 15, Week 14 was... I don't know how to describe Week 14. I thought it was probably one of the craziest NFL weekends we've had probably in years. You look at a couple things that the Bills playoff hopes are still alive, defeating the Chiefs. The Chiefs complaining about an offside penalty that went on them. Obviously, I felt like the Chiefs basically should have taken some responsibility for that. Obviously, a couple of weeks after the Packers game, yeah, I do agree that some of the calls I felt were pretty bogus on that there was no DPI. But this game against the Bills, in a game that the Bills had to have, the Chiefs, the refs, at one point, the refs actually got it right. I mean, it's rare offsides that happens on the offense, but it does happen. But it's rarely called at times, and I think it was probably, and I think to me getting called like that, I mean, look, the Chiefs need to take some responsibilities for that, and obviously their chances at the number 1 seed are slipping. And to make matters worse for the Chiefs, the Broncos are only 1 game back of the AFC West. Given with the records of the Chiefs of 8-5 and the Broncos now achieving a 7-6 record, they're just 1 game back of that AFC West. If you're a Chiefs fan, that's kind of scary right now. The fact that to say that the Broncos of all teams could steal the division, it's still a long shot for the Broncos because their schedule doesn't favor them still. But who's to say? When you look at other things that happened in week number 14, obviously the Cowboys finally beating the Eagles. But to be fair, the Eagles were pretty banged up going into that game, and it was pretty obvious, like I said last week, the Eagles are exhausted. They've had their schedule the last few weeks. Obviously, you could say there's no excuse. Obviously, getting whooped by the Niners, that was kind of obvious. But the Cowboys, I still don't buy the Cowboys just yet. You've beaten an Eagles team that basically was exhausted, and earlier in the season, the 49ers whooped you. The Cowboys got 2 tough games in the remaining 4 games they've had and coming up. The Bills and the Dolphins, which I feel and the Detroit Lions as well. That's basically, you got 3 out of 4 games that could still not guarantee you that NFC East division, let alone the number 1 seed. If you look at basically what happened, and obviously a lot of things also went on in week 14. Obviously, the big story really is DeVito of the New York Giants. What a story this has been for this guy. Coming off a native New Jerseyan, an undrafted quarterback. He's basically had to come into the role basically with Daniel Jones hurt and Tyrod Taylor being hurt as well. This guy has really made a name for himself and making the best of that opportunity, winning 3 out of his 4 starts. It's been a great story for the New York Giants. Look, it's still not going to guarantee them a playoff berth anyways, because given their current record and their remaining schedule, it doesn't favor them. But going into next season, could DeVito take the job away from Daniel Jones? Obviously, he's going to have to fight. Daniel Jones now is going to have a quarterback battle going into next season, despite all the money that the Giants gave him. So it's going to be interesting to see. And what about the Miami Dolphins? A 14-point lead in the 4th quarter, and their defense fell asleep at the wheel, despite that game was given to them with the self-destruction of the Titans, and yet they ended up choking in the end, losing by 1, 28-27. Miami blew their chance also at the number 1 seed, in my honest opinion. They also got the Cowboys coming up. That's not an easy game for them. And who's to say the Bills could sneak up on them? Remember, the Bills are not that far behind. If Miami slips up, the Bills could still end up stealing that AFC East division. It's still a long shot, but it could possibly happen. Too many things that went on in week 14. I wish I had a lot of time to talk about it. It's basically what happened last week. It would have its own segment, its own little cameo or whatever. So as I said, as the text flew on the screen, that is your current playoff. That's your current 1 through 7 seeds in both conferences. So if you saw the text on the fly, so yeah, that's basically what we're dealing with right now. Anyways, let's talk about week 15. Pretty good slate of week 15 games and a lot of importance. And here are the games I'm going to talk about. Let's begin with key game number 1. It is the Vikings versus the Bengals. The Bengals are a 3-point favorite, and I would say that is about right. Nick Mullins had to come into the football game because Dobbs ended up getting hurt. I think he's under a concussion protocol or some other injury. I mean, Nick Mullins, I mean, they only beat the Raiders 3-0. And especially now that the Vikings are trying to fight for a playoff spot right now, this is not good. Given the fact that they also have the Packers behind them, they could sneak up to steal the 6th seed away. And you got to wonder for this Vikings team, where do they stand at this point? I mean, Mullins was only 9 of 13, 83 yards, no touchdowns, no interceptions, because they only won by a field goal. Now, Jake Browning of the Bengals, they were basically in a football game last week with the Colts. They had a good game. Jake Browning was 18 of 24, 275 yards, 2 touchdowns, and 1 interception. The Bengals are a 3-point favorite in this one here, and that is about right. I don't think that's going to change all that much. Who knows if the Bengals now could be favored by maybe 4.5 maybe. Tough to say what will go on in this football game on Saturday. Now, Minnesota and Cincinnati is one of the 3 games that are going to be played on Saturday, obviously because college football is now going to be having their playoff. So now the NFL can squeeze in some Saturday games now between now and the end of the regular season. When I look at this football game here, Minnesota's defense is going to have to find a way to stop a mediocre Bengals offense. And I say mediocre because Jake Browning, despite the interception, and obviously they did struggle against the Colts, but obviously their wide receivers like Higgins and Chase are going to have to really come up big in this game. I'm picking the Bengals because I just think that Minnesota, they're depleted now. You don't have Dobbs. Dobbs gave you a good chance to win. Now that he's not available, we don't know what we're going to get out of Nick Mullins. And it's really kind of an easy pick on this one here, especially the Vikings for playoff positioning purposes. And for the Bengals, they're trying to hold on to a playoff spot. So it's tough to say what comes out of this football game, but I like the Bengals in this one here. I think the Vikings don't have enough to beat this team. The Bengals are trying to keep their playoff hopes alive as well. And I like the Bengals in this one here. I think that their offense will be enough. I don't think Minnesota's going to be able to stop Higgins and Chase in this football game here. I like the Bengals at -3 in here, Bengals over the Vikings. Key game number 2, the Denver Broncos versus the Detroit Lions. Another of the Saturday games. The Lions are a 4-point favorite, and it would not surprise me one bit if that number goes down to 3.5 or maybe 3, given the fact that Jared Goff, 20 of 35, 161 yards, 1 touchdown, and 2 interceptions, in a terrible loss to the Bears last week. You got to wonder about Jared Goff's confidence now. He was rolling very high in the beginning of the season, but then with the Lions hitting some bump on the road, given the fact, look, they still have a slight edge in their own division, but given how this is now playoff positioning here, you got to wonder, do you want to stay at that 3 seed or number 2, especially with that last meeting, what they had with the Packers, they ended up beating them. I don't know if anybody wants to play the Packers going into the postseason. I don't know if the Lions want that. Denver right now is trying to fight. They're trying to keep their playoff hopes alive. Not only that, they have a shot of stealing the AFC West away from the Chiefs, even though it's a long shot, but they have a slight chance. Russell Wilson, basically they demolished the Chargers last week, was 21 of 33, 224 yards, 2 touchdowns, and 1 interception. Denver's playing pretty well. And now and when I think about it here, the Lions are kind of, in terms of their defense, there's some question marks going on in that Lions defense. Their secondary has had trouble giving up some running plays that you got to wonder if Russell Wilson's going to use his legs to get through that Lion defense. And it would not surprise me if he does. There's a lot of question marks going on with that Detroit Lions. Obviously, I know they still have some injuries, but their running game was the only thing that was a bit effective last week against the Bears, and Jared Goff really struggled in the passing game. In a game that basically for playoff positioning for both these two football teams, and obviously for the Lions here, they want to wrap up the NFC North division fast because they do not want the Packers to continue to climb up and try to steal the division from them. I look at this football game for the Lions. They got to be able to get to Russell Wilson. They got to put pressure on him, and they got to be able to stop the run as well. It is not going to be an easy football game for this. It's not going to be an easy football game for the Lions here. Denver is playing at a point where nobody thought they would get this far. It's a tough football game, but I feel the Lions will be back on track in this football game, in a game they absolutely have to have, as well as the Broncos. I think, to me, that Dan Campbell will get that team ready this time. He's got to, because this football team right now, we thought they had their identity, and we don't even know where they stand now. But somehow, I think Dan Campbell and that coaching, they'll find a way to fix this thing for this game. They know it's important to try to keep pace for at least the 2 seed. I think it's going to be a back-and-forth football game. This should be a good football game on Saturday night. But I'm going to go with the Lions here. I think the Lions will get back on track here. It's going to be a very tight game all the way. It's definitely going to go back and forth here. I see the Lions winning by a field goal here. Should be a good one in Detroit. I like the Lions in this one here. I think they'll barely beat the Broncos in this one here. I'll take the Lions -4. Lions over the Broncos. All right, key game number 3 now. It is the Ravens versus the Jaguars. The Baltimore Ravens are a 3.5-point favorite, and I would say that's about right. Lamar Jackson was 24-43, 316 yards, 3 touchdowns, 1 interception. The Ravens actually got into a football game with the Rams. Obviously, the Rams are also fighting for a playoff spot in the NFC, and they really gave all that the Ravens could handle. I start to wonder now. Now, look, the Ravens are currently the number 1 seed, and you got to wonder now, did the Rams expose something on the Ravens? Because the Ravens had to go into overtime with this team, and you got to wonder about the Ravens' defense here. Did the Rams kind of expose them? Especially now, especially for the Jaguars right now. Obviously, they're trying to wrap up the AFC South division because they're still in contention with the Colts and the Texans, even though the Jaguars currently hold the division lead on both those teams. Trevor Lawrence was 28 of 50, 257 yards, 3 touchdowns, and 3 interceptions. I don't know how healthy he's going to be in for this game. Obviously, that leg is still that ankle's still bothering him. There's question marks going on with that offense. They've lost 2 in a row, and you got to wonder where their offense stands at this point. And obviously, the importance of this game is playoff positioning. Obviously, the Ravens still kind of have the edge for the number 1 seed, but for the Jaguars, if they were to beat the Ravens, they could hold a tiebreaker for that number 1 seed. This football game is going to come down to a couple things. Can the Ravens avoid another close game? Because they've been fortunate they beat the Rams in a close game, but when it comes down to close football games, the Ravens really end up getting screwed. There's got to be a point where the Ravens have to show some dominance. They didn't show any of that against the Rams. And at a point, we don't know where the Jaguars stand at this point with Trevor Lawrence and his ankle. This is a golden opportunity for the Ravens to make a point and to make a statement. It's going to come down to turnovers and which team make big plays. I'm picking the Ravens here. I think the Ravens will make a statement here. They'll get into a football game for sure, but I think the Ravens will make their statement and make their statement to get that number 1 seed. The Jaguars are really struggling right now, and they've struggled in their last 2 games, and now they're barely clinging on to a 1-game lead in their own division. And this could get worse if Trevor Lawrence is not healthy. I'm picking the Ravens here. It'll definitely be a football game, but I think the Ravens will pull it out here. And I think the Ravens will be much inches closer to wrapping up their own division as well. I'm gonna pick the Ravens at 3.5 to beat the Jaguars. And finally, key game number 4, a very big one here. The Cowboys versus the Bills. The Bills are only a 1-point favorite in this one here. And obviously they had a big victory over the Chiefs, and they're flying high. Cowboys, a big victory over the Eagles. They're starting to fly high. Now it's crunch time. I would say a little bit more for the Cowboys as much as it is for the Bills. Now the Bills are going to be playing more desperate than the Cowboys are. And obviously the Cowboys are trying to wrap up the NFC East and try to catch the 49ers for that number 1 seed. Dak Prescott in a big victory over the Eagles was 24-39, 271 yards, 2 touchdowns, no interceptions. Josh Allen in his game against the Chiefs was 23-42, 233 yards, 1 touchdown, and 1 interception. For the Bills, their defense better get to Dak Prescott if they want any chance of winning this football game. It's going to come down to the defense for the Bills. They have got to find a way to slow down Dak Prescott, and the Bills' offense is going to have to find a way to break through that Cowboy defense because that defense has really dominated the last few games. I have to say this really is a tough pick because the Bills are playing desperately and the Cowboys want that number 1 seed. it is a tough pick. It boils down to, like Baltimore and Jacksonville, who doesn't turn the ball over, who makes the big plays, and time of possession. And hopefully, and at the same time, no penalties. Or fewer penalties. Tough football game to pick here. I'm actually going to go with the Bills here. I think the Bills, obviously they want another postseason berth. Obviously, they haven't been the same football team since 2021. And they are trying to really, really send a message to the AFC, don't forget about us. The Bills are still heavy underdogs in the postseason, if they actually make the postseason. And they still have a chance to catch Miami, because Miami's got some tough games ahead. The Bills probably only have the Cowboys as probably their last toughest opponent remaining on their schedule. It's a tough game here. This is really a 50-50 pick who wins this football game here, because the Bills are going to be playing more desperate than the Cowboys are. Who do I like in this game? I'm going to pick the Bills at -1. I think Josh Allen, especially, the Cowboys have struggled on the road, even though in their football games they've won. They do have a hard time playing on the road, and they get into more football games when they're on the road. So I would think that for this football game here, the Bills are going to be playing desperate and obviously fighting for a playoff berth. Especially if they want to try to catch Miami to try to steal the division away from them, given how the Dolphins have really struggled after losing Tyreek Hill on Monday night. The Bills know their playoff hopes now are hanging by a thread if they lose this football game, or more likely they could be finished. I'm picking the Bills here at -1. I think, to me, they'll barely beat the Cowboys here. I think the Cowboys struggles on the road will continue, even though they won a lot of their games on the road. But I think they're going to struggle here, which could give the Eagles new life for that division. I'm picking the Bills in this one here. I think they'll get the job done. It's going to be a very tight game. It could be low scoring by the looks of it. I'm picking the Bills over the Cowboys. All right, everybody, that wraps up my picks for my 4 key game picks for week number 15. Please check the description below for all of my week 15 picks. And until then, I'll talk to you guys next week when I talk about week 16. Take care and enjoy your NFL weekend.